I get it. You've probably spent a few minutes scrolling through endless NAS options, watching the price tags climb, and wondering if you'll end up with a box that just sits there collecting dust. The fear of splurging on a high-end unit only to discover it's overkill for your workflow, or worse, that it doesn't play nice with the apps you actually need, is real. If you're sitting on the edge of a decision and want to know whether the QNAP Turbo NAS TVS 473e is the kind of investment that actually pays off for a small office, a media-centric home, or a budding content creator, stick around. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, this isn't a plug-and-play appliance. QNAP ships the chassis sealed, but the drives and the 32 GB of DDR4 memory arrive unpackaged. That means you'll have to pop open the front panel, slide the 2 TB SSD into the designated bay, and install your chosen HDDs before you see any action. For a tech-savvy user who enjoys the ritual of building a system, that's part of the fun. If you're hoping for a Radeon box that just works out of the gate, you'll need to budget some extra time and perhaps a screwdriver into the setup process. Now, why would you want to go through that extra step? The TVS 473e is built around an AMD RX 421BD processor paired with Radeon R7 graphics. That combination gives it enough horsepower to run QTS 4.3, the QNAP operating system, without turning your network into a bottleneck. In practical terms, I've seen users stream 4K video from a NAS to a TV while simultaneously pulling large files for a design team, and the experience remains smooth. The 2 HDMI outputs make it easy to connect directly to a monitor or TV for a quick media preview, which is a nice bonus if you use the unit as a personal media hub. What really sets this model apart is the flexibility of its connectivity. For USB 3.0 ports give you room for external backup drives, a card reader, or a direct camera connection for quick offload. The 4 1GB Ethernet ports can be bonded for link aggregation, effectively multiplying the bandwidth and providing redundancy perfect if you run a small office where downtime is costly. In my own test scenario, I bonded 2 ports and saw transfer speeds climb from the mid-hundreds of megabytes per second up to a solid 800 megabytes per second when moving a 50 GB project folder, which is the kind of throughput that makes collaborative editing feasible without a dedicated server room. That said, there are trade-offs that matter once the box is up and running. The first is power consumption. While QNAP markets this unit as energy efficient, the combination of a dedicated GPU, 4 drive bays, and an AMD CPU means the idle draw is still higher than a simple ARM-based NAS. If you plan to run it 24/7 in a home office, you'll see a noticeable addition to your electricity bill. Nothing astronomical, but something to factor into the total cost of ownership. Another practical consideration is noise. The fans are designed to keep the drives cool under load, and they do a decent job, but in a quiet living room the hum becomes apparent when the RAID is rebuilding or when you're streaming high bitrate content. If you need a truly silent environment, think a bedroom studio or a library. This might be a point of friction. So who should actually buy this? If you're a freelance video editor who needs a centralized, high-speed repository for raw footage, the TVS 473e's SSD cache and RAID options give you both speed and data protection without forcing you to juggle external drives. The ability to run QTS apps means you can host a Plex server, run Docker containers for custom workflows, or set up a surveillance station for a few IP cameras all from the same box. Small creative teams that require a mix of media playback, file sharing, and occasional compute tasks will find the price justified because you're essentially buying a mini workstation and a storage array in one. On the flip side, if your primary need is just a simple backup repository for a handful of laptops, the TVS 473e is likely overkill. A 2-bay or 3-bay NAS with a lower-tier CPU would handle scheduled backups just as well, at a lower upfront cost and with less heat and noise. Likewise, households that only stream movies occasionally and don't need the extra GPU horsepower could look at more budget-friendly models. The Radeon R7 will rarely be utilized unless you're doing hardware-accelerated transcoding for multiple streams. When it comes to value, the headline specs AMD CPU, Radeon graphics, 32 GB RAM are impressive, but the real savings come from how you configure the storage. Starting with a 2TB SSD for the operating system and cache, then adding a pair of 8TB HDDs in a RAID 5 array gives you roughly 16TB of usable space with redundancy. You pay for the drive separately, which can actually be a benefit because you control the brand, warranty, and performance of each disk. If you already have a stash of reliable HDDs, the initial outlay drops dramatically,